Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. My name is Natalia Moczulska and this is the news. Yesterday, before midnight, the Ukrainian side provided information on the successful exchange of prisoners of war with Russia. 215 prisoners of war were released from Russian captivity, including many officers, commanders and defenders of Azovstal. In return, the Ukrainians released Viktor Medvedchuk, known as Putin's friend, and over 50 Russians. The exchange took place tonight. Under the concluded agreements, 215 people were released in total. Among those released, there were 10 foreigners who fought in the ranks of the Ukrainian army. Saudi Arabia became involved in the process of their release from captivity. 10 citizens of Great Britain, USA, Croatia, Morocco, and Sweden are now safe. At the moment, we are in the capital of Saudi Arabia, from where they will be safely delivered to their countries. We thank every foreign soldier for defending freedom and human rights with us. As many as 200 people were exchanged for one traitor, the Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Medvedchuk, who was closely related to Vladimir Putin. The negotiation process dragged on. We faced new obstacles, and Russia kept changing agreements in the course of negotiations. It constantly reduced the number of people who could be released from captivity. Finally, we exchanged 55 Russian prisoners of war and Viktor Medvedchuk, who during the investigation revealed to us all the information of interest to us. Among the people who returned to Ukraine are, among others, doctors Kateryna Polishchuk, Zoriana Repecka, Mariana Mamonova, Jana Szumowecka, and Anastasia Chornenka. This exchange has been in preparation for many months, but we couldn't talk about it even 2 days ago when everything was already agreed. We were afraid that something would stand in the way. We made sure that nobody said too much. Of the 215 dismissed people, 108 are soldiers of the Azov regiment. Among the mentioned are the most famous commanders from Mariupol, Denis Prokopenko-Redis, who regularly reported on the situation in the besieged Azovstal plants, Serhiy Wołyński-Wołyna, commander of the 36th Marine Brigade, Światosław Pałamar, Denis Szweda, and Oleg Homenko. Their release was possible thanks to the personal intercession of Turkish President Recep Erdogan. According to the contract, they must remain in his care until the end of the war. I would also like to thank all those who are defending Ukraine at the moment and who are carrying out their combat tasks right now, on this day and at this moment. I am happy along with our families, and I am grateful to all of our heroes. Now you must rest. Thank you.
Все добре. Слава Україні. Побачимось обов'язково.
211 days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In his speech at the UN General Assembly, Volodymyr Zelensky presented a 5-point formula for peace, which he believes will ensure peace for Ukraine and discourage future potential aggressors. Meanwhile, the Russians fired again at the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia. Yesterday, the Russian president announced military mobilization in a special decree. Massive demonstrations were organized across the country to protest against this decision. Force was used against the protesters. Over 1,300 people were detained in 38 Russian cities. This criminal conflict continues to deepen. Putin is trying to get as many people as possible into all of this. It will make them complicit in the bloodshed of hundreds of thousands of people. This war will lead to a huge tragedy, a huge number of deaths. According to the findings of Ukrainian intelligence, at the beginning of the war, the Russians engaged 120,000 soldiers in the fight. Almost half of them died in the course of hostilities. The losses will be supplemented by over 300,000 new recruits. Russia really has the ability to mobilize these people, while it still needs time to do so. But I also have to mention that Ukraine also has its capabilities. Only at the moment, they have mobilization reserves of 1 million people. The third day of the UN General Assembly's high-level debate is taking place in New York. President Volodymyr Zelensky demands the creation of a special tribunal to punish Moscow for war crimes in Ukraine.
A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the lives of our people. The crime was committed against the dignity of our women and men. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations.
The talks of world leaders focus on yesterday's speech by Vladimir Putin and the nuclear threats it contains. The leaders declare continued support for Kiev in the unequal war with Moscow.
This is a decisive moment in our history, in the history of this organization, and in the history of freedom. The story of 2022 could have been that of an authoritarian state rolling its tanks over the border of a peaceful neighbor and subjugating its people. Instead, it's a story of freedom fighting back. In the face of rising aggression, we've shown that we have the power to act and the resolve to see it through. But this can't be a one-off. This must be a new era where we commit to ourselves, to our citizens, and this institution that we will do whatever it takes to deliver for our people and defend our values.
A member of the Permanent Security Council is violating the most basic tenets of what the UN stands for. This is why Canada continues to stand strongly in support of Ukraine, to hold Putin to account, and to ensure that countries around the world understand that this attack on the sovereignty, on the territorial integrity, on the well-being of an independent country like Ukraine is absolutely unacceptable, why we continue to ensure that we do everything necessary to make sure Putin and his cronies are held to account for their horrific actions, the illegal invasion, and the war crimes that they're busy committing.
The European Union will prepare the 8th package of sanctions against Russia. The head of EU diplomacy, Josep Borrell, informed about this after an informal meeting of the community's foreign ministers. In addition to the sanctions, further shipments of weapons to Ukraine are also planned.
Wants to destroy Ukraine by all means, violating international law and the United Nations Charter since the beginning. But now it looks like Russia's Putin wants to destroy Ukraine. And the international community gathered here in New York needs to take full measure of what is at stake.
President Andrzej Duda said yesterday on PBS that Russia is struggling with a collapse of its image, and the decision to mobilize the military caused panic in the society. In recent hours, the Russians began to buy air tickets en masse, which is confirmed by Russian carriers.
Is in a difficult situation. Russia has demonstrated its weakness. What Russia has been doing so far in Ukraine, the aggression and all the outrageous dimensions of the war which Russia demonstrated in Ukraine, as a matter of fact, have turned out to be a failure of Russia. Russia tries to change its tactics at the same time it tries to threaten the world with nuclear weapons. Please bear in mind that at the beginning, before the war happened, the experts were saying it would be enough for Russia to conquer the whole of Ukraine within 72 hours. However, they failed to seize the whole of Ukraine. You can see an attempt to save face, and this mobilization, this partial mobilization, which was announced in Russia, well, it causes a horror among his society because thousands of Russian soldiers have already died in Ukraine. There will be further thousands following. This is going to be the policy of the Russian authorities right now, so we can see a weakness of Russia in this respect.
Meanwhile, action at the front continues. Yesterday, Russian artillery fired missiles at the Ukrainian nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia. As a result of the shelling, the power line was damaged, and the operation of several transformers was suspended. The Russians also fired on the nuclear power plant in the Mykolaiv Oblast on Monday.
And direct attacks on the facility. So I'm very worried. One of the things that happened was that a pool where spent nuclear fuel is being cooled became, stopped operations because one pipeline was affected, etc. So anytime something can happen. I've been saying this for many, many months. We are playing with fire. We continue to play with fire. I'm trying to do as much as I can, as fast as I can.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have regained a bridgehead in the Luhansk region and are planning further attacks in response to the successes of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Russians are planning to hold referendums this week that would decide the future of the occupied territories. The plebiscite was planned in the Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia oblasts. Although most residents of these areas have announced a boycott of the referendum, there is no shortage of cases of outright collaboration with the enemy. Everything will be fine. Soon after the referendum, the situation will improve. That's why we are waiting for the vote. Incorporating the areas where the pseudo-referendum will be held into Russia will make it more difficult for the Ukrainian army to recapture them. In a speech yesterday, Vladimir Putin warned that an attack on his country's territory would trigger a nuclear conflict. A new building of the Polish Royal Opera House will be built in the vicinity of the Stanisławowski Theater in the Royal Baths Park, announced Piotr Gliński, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Culture and National Heritage. The Polish Royal Opera began operating as a new state cultural institution on August 1st, 2017. It shows performances at the Royal Theater in the Old Orangery in the Royal Baths Park, but has no permanent premises yet. The history of the Polish Royal Opera House. One might like it to be such a short history of Polish culture because it shows the extraordinary courage and non-standard nature of all decisions and the entire history. I will talk about it in detail in a moment. It shows the importance of friendship and building a good environment, or just finding a lot of friends around. And it shows the importance of activity and vitality, not worrying about the fact that so far it hasn't been done or something can't be done. As it turns out, everything can be done. Despite the pandemic for 2 years, we have 5 years of activity, 580 events, 25 opera premieres alone, 47 more events outside of Warsaw, and those trips abroad, etc., etc. The Polish Royal Opera will have a new location. I think that the Royal Baths will continue to admit us, Madame Director, here to this wonderful place for special events, and not far from the Stanisławowski Theater. We will have a new building of the Polish Royal Opera.
Będziemy mieli nowy gmach Polskiej Opery Królewskiej.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please stay tuned for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and some of our other programs. But for me, it's have a wonderful evening.